Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends, just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed. Get ready for 20 of the most disturbing true Texas road trip horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. It was the first week of March last year. I was heading west on I-10 toward El Paso. I'd been driving a refrigerated trailer for nearly a decade, and nights on the interstate had long ago become second nature to me. That night was clear and moonless, the kind of desert night where the stars looked like someone had thrown a handful of salt across black velvet. The air outside was crisp but dry, the truck's thermometer showing 47 degrees, and I had the window cracked, just enough to feel the desert wind whipping along the cab. I'd pulled out of San Antonio late that afternoon with a load of produce, and my plan was to make it past Fort Stockton before pulling off to rest. I was tired, but not exhausted. I'd had coffee at a little truck stop near Kerrville and was running steady with the cruise control at 6. The CB was mostly quiet, just the occasional voice crackling in about speed traps or weather. I liked it that way. The desert at night had a strange peace to it. A vast emptiness that swallowed sound and left you alone with the hum of your engine. Out here, you could drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle in your mirrors. And when headlights finally showed, it felt like company. It was around 2 in the morning when I noticed the sign. Bright green, reflective under my high beams. It announced an exit a mile ahead. County Road 1734 to services, fuel, lodging. I hadn't seen that one before, and I'd run this stretch plenty of times. But I was starting to feel that creeping burn behind my eyes that meant I needed rest soon. The thought of a fuel stop and a hot cup of coffee was too good to ignore. I tapped the brake, leaned forward in my seat, and fixed my eyes on the glowing sign as I drew closer. The thing about exit signs is they're usually lit by reflectors or occasionally a floodlight mounted nearby. This one seemed to glow on its use. This one seemed to glow on its own, almost too bright. It had that strange shimmering quality, like heat rising off asphalt in the middle of summer. My first thought was that the reflective paint was fresh, maybe brand new. Still, I didn't recall hearing about any new development out here. Most exits between Fort Stockton and Van Horn are dusty little cutoffs that lead to a gas pump or to maybe a lonely diner if you're lucky. As I passed the half-mile marker, the sign for the exit ramp appeared. Large white letters reading Exit 142 and an arrow pointing right. Again, it had that odd, almost luminous glow. I flipped on my blinker, checked the mirrors, and steered the rig into the right lane. Oh, the ramp angled down gently, its asphalt smooth and darker than the weathered interstate. My headlights swept over the curve, and sure enough, I saw a row of orange sodium lamps in the distance, like a tiny town huddled against the desert. Relief settled over me. I'd gas up, grab coffee, maybe even park and catch a couple hours of sleep. The ramp was longer than I expected. The glow of the lamps ahead seemed to stretch away the closer I got, like the distance wasn't closing. The way it should. My hands tightened on the wheel. The CB gave a faint hiss of static, then went dead quiet. I slowed to 50, then 40. Finally, the ramp leveled off and merged onto what looked like a two-lane frontage road. But instead of the gravel shoulders and faded striping I'd expect, the pavement was flawless, deep black and smooth as glass. My headlights picked out the reflective line down the middle, pristine and sharp. It felt wrong. Out here, roads cracked fast under the desert sun. I hadn't seen asphalt that perfect anywhere in West Texas. "All right," I muttered under my breath. "New road? Maybe." My voice sounded hollow in the cab. I kept rolling, eyes straining toward the lights ahead. The glow had shifted from orange to a pale, whitish color. Not fluorescent, not halogens, something in between. It reminded me of hospital corridors. The closer I came, the more uneasy I felt. I expected to see the familiar silhouettes of a gas station canopy or motel sign. But instead, there was only a cluster of squat, windowless buildings, their surfaces flat and colorless under the strange light. No signs, no logos, no gas prices. Just structures arranged in a half circle as though waiting for me. A prickle ran across the back of my neck. I slowed to 20, then 10. The road ended in a wide lot paved with that same flawless blacktop. Not a single car was parked there. The buildings loomed, silent and still. My headlights cut across their blank walls, and I noticed the absence of doors, just smooth, seamless facades, like stage sets waiting for someone to paint the details in later. I felt a sudden jolt of panic. My foot hit the brake, and I stopped in the center of the lot. For a long moment, I sat frozen, staring at the sterile shapes in front of me. My engine rumbled low, the sound far too loud in the emptiness. The radio was dead, even the static gone. I reached for the CB mic, thumbed the button, and said, "Anybody copy? Westbound I-10 near Fort Stockton." Nothing. Just dead silence. Then, faintly, something moved. Not in the buildings, but in the darkness beyond the pale lights. A shape slid across the edge of the lot, just outside the reach of my high beams. I whipped my head to follow it, but it was gone. My skin went cold. I shifted the truck into gear, ready to pull a hard U-turn and get back onto the ramp. But when I looked in the mirrors, the road I'd come down wasn't there anymore. Behind me stretched only more black top, fading into an empty horizon. Number. Ramp, no interstate, just endless scrubland in the distance. I cursed out loud, my voice shaking. No, 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 no. The glow of the buildings pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. And then I saw them doorways. They hadn't been there a second ago. Rectangles of blackness, opening one by one across the blank walls. Darker than shadow, darker than night itself. As if the walls were holes punched into nothing. Something moved inside those doorways, shapes tall and thin, stepping forward slowly but never crossing the threshold. My high beams caught the edge of one, but the light seemed to slide off it, leaving only a suggestion of a figure. My gut clenched. Whatever they weren't people. I slammed the truck into reverse, the engine roaring as I backed up fast. My tires squealed against the perfect asphalt. I swung the wheel and floored it, desperate to put distance between me and those doorways. The lot fell away, the lights fading behind me. And then, without warning, my headlights swept across the reflective markers of I-10. I was back on the interstate, the rig thundering along at 70. My heart hammered so hard I thought I'd pass out. I drove until dawn. Hands locked on the wheel, refusing to pull over. When the first light bled across the desert, I eased up and scanned the roadside. Mile marker after mile marker ticked by. But when I reached the spot where the glowing sign had been, there was nothing. Just barbed wire, sand, and scrub stretching. To the horizon, no ramp, no county road, no sign. I've run that route twice since then. Every time I approach Fort Stockton, I feel my chest tighten, waiting for that impossible green glow to appear. It hasn't. Sometimes I wonder if it was a dream, some hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But then I think about the perfect asphalt, the lifeless buildings, and those doorways that opened like wounds in the dark. And I know better. If you're ever driving I-10 West at night and you see a sign for County Road 1734, keep going. Don't take that exit. Because once you do, you might not find your way back. It was late September of last year, the kind of night where the air carries that faint, metallic edge of autumn, and the sky over West Texas feels wider than it has any right to be. I was driving south on US 277, about 20 minutes outside Abilene, headed toward San Angelo for work. The time was just past 11. I remember glancing at the dash clock, watching it flick from 11:07 to 11:08. The green numbers glowing in the dark like they were trying to anchor me against the endless stretch of road ahead. There wasn't much traffic. One or two trucks had thundered past me earlier, their taillights shrinking into the black horizon, but otherwise, I had the two-lane highway to myself. The weather was still and dry, the wind absent in that eerie way it sometimes is out on the plains, where it feels like even nature is holding its breath. I rolled my window down halfway to let the cool air in. The night smelled of dust and cedar, that sharp, earthy Texas scent. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon unraveling into nothing. That's when I noticed them. 3 cars up ahead, pulled onto the shoulder. All of them dark-colored sedans, older models, lined up almost too perfectly, as though placed there by some careful hand. Each one had its hazard lights blinking, only they weren't blinking in the normal, random rhythm you'd expect from different cars. They were flashing in perfect unison, a synchronized pulse of amber light cutting through the dark. On, off, on, off. Every blink in rhythm, like a metronome. I slowed the car, instinctively easing off the gas. My headlights caught the reflective tape on the back bumpers, then the dull sheen of the windows. All 3 cars sat dead still, angled at the same degree, hazards keeping their steady. Unnatural tempo. For a second, I thought maybe it was some kind of accident or roadblock. But there was no damage, no skid marks, nothing spilled across the asphalt, and no one standing outside. The cars were just there. I drove by slowly, craning my neck to look inside the first one. The cabin was empty, the second one too, and the third. All 3 sat abandoned, hazard lights pulsing in unison like the heartbeat of something I couldn't see. A chill prickled down my spine. I tapped the brake again, my gut torn between pulling over to check and pressing the gas to keep moving. That's when the hairs on my neck stood straight up, because I realized the pattern of the blinks wasn't random at all. The flashes were spelling something. I know it sounds insane, but the longer I stared at the rhythm short, short, long pause, long short, the more it felt like Morse code. My uncle taught me the basics when I was a kid. It came back to me like muscle memory. The sequence repeated, clean, deliberate. I mouthed the letters without even realizing. H, E, L, P. Help. The 3 dead cars were spelling out help. I hit the gas hard. My tires spit gravel as I shot past them, my rearview mirror filling with the rhythmic amber flashes. On, off, on, off. Help, help, help. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My heart was hammering so violently that it hurt. For 10 minutes, I didn't dare slow down. My headlights cut the dark ahead, and I caught myself checking the shoulder compulsively, half expecting to see more cars lined up with their hazards speaking in code. The road, mercifully, stayed empty. Finally, when the adrenaline had ebbed just enough to think straight, I pulled into a small gas station outside Tuscola. The place was mostly shut down for the night, just one pump lit and an old man inside. The attached shop, watching a muted TV behind the counter. I walked in, still shaky, and bought a coffee I didn't even want. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the man said as he rang me up. I hesitated, then asked, "You ever notice anything weird on 277? Like cars pulled over, hazards on?" He stopped mid-reach for the receipt tape. His face changed. Not shock, not confusion, more like recognition. Slowly, he shook his head. "Best you don't stop for things out there at night," he said finally, voice low. "Ain't always people needing help." I pressed, but he wouldn't say more. Just stared at me with a kind of pity until I left. I got back in my car and drove the rest of the way with the radio off, too afraid of missing the sound of those synchronized blinks following me down the highway. But they never showed again. Here's the part that keeps me awake sometimes. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, or that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But later that day, curiosity got the better of me, and I Googled abandoned cars US 277 Abilene. I found a news clipping from 1998. 3 vehicles were discovered on that stretch of road. All pulled over on the shoulder. No bodies inside. No sign of struggle. Families reported the drivers missing, but they were never found. Witnesses who first reported the cars said their hazard lights were on. All 3? I can't explain what I saw. I don't want to. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and the road is empty for miles, I swear I see a faint amber pulse in the distance, beating out a word I don't want to read again. And if you ever find yourself on US 277 outside Abilene, and you see 3 cars lined up with their hazards blinking in perfect time, do not stop. Keep driving, because whatever those lights are calling for, it isn't help. It was the fall of 2019, early October, the kind of humid Texas night where the air feels heavier than it should, even after the sun has gone down. I was driving along State Highway 87 toward High Island, heading back from a fishing trip near Bolivar Peninsula. It was just past 3 in the morning. I remember glancing at the digital clock on my dashboard. 3:12 a.m., the road stretched long and lonely. A straight black ribbon lined with marshland and the occasional thicket of saltgrass. The smell of brine crept in through the vents. And every so often, the wind carried a whiff of something swampy and sour, like rotting vegetation. I wasn't drunk or tired enough to be hallucinating. I hadn't even had a beer. Just bone deep, tired from a long day of fishing and fighting mosquitoes. My headlights swept the 2-lane asphalt, reflecting back at me in bands of white off the reflective posts. The hum of the tires and the faint slap of insects against the windshield was the only company I had. It was quiet, too quiet. And that's when I saw him, at first. I thought it was just another trick of headlights, the way shadows shift when your eyes are strained. But no, there he was, a man standing on the shoulder, soaked to the skin, waving his arms wildly. He wasn't wearing anything strange, just a button-down shirt plastered against his chest, slacks, and shoes so dark they might as well have been black. His hair was matted flat, dripping water down his face. He looked like he'd crawled out of the bay. He was waving me down frantically, and in the reflection of my headlights I could see his mouth moving, forming words I couldn't hear through. The glass-eye slowed. Every survival instinct told me not to, but there's something in us, call it decency, that makes you hesitate when you see someone who looks like they're about to die out there on the side of the road. He staggered closer, both palms out, shaking his head like he was pleading. I rolled my window down just a crack. "Please," he rasped. His voice was rough, like it had been shredded by salt water. "Please, you have to tell her. You have to. Tell Mary I'm sorry." I felt my stomach twist. He leaned closer, rain or maybe just water dripping off his head, spattering against my door. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, eyes wild with desperation. He tapped the roof of my car with a trembling hand. "She lives on." He stopped mid-sentence, choking, coughing up something he didn't spit out. "Tell her I didn't mean to. Tell her I love her, please." I remember mumbling something useless, like, "Who? Where?" But he only repeated the name, Mary, and the apology. Then his expression changed. He stiffened, eyes widening as if he was staring past me into the back seat. His mouth opened as if to scream, but instead he stumbled backwards into the dark. My headlights caught him for a split second. I'm still reaching out hand. Then he was gone. Not walking away, not ducking into the grass. Gone. Like I'd blinked and the road had swallowed him whole. I hit the brakes so hard, the car fishtailed. My heart was hammering. Sweat slicked across my palms. I jumped out, flashlight in hand. Sweeping the shoulder and the ditches. Nothing. The grass was dry where he'd stood. No footprints. Not even a drop of water. Just the sound of frogs croaking somewhere out in the marsh and the lonely whistle of wind. I told myself I'd imagined it. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it. But when I got back into the car, there was a wet handprint on the roof, right above the driver's side door. It stayed there until the morning sun burned it away. I didn't talk about it for months. When I finally did, it was over beers with an old friend from Galveston who'd worked shrimp boats for years. I expected him to laugh. Instead, he went pale and set his bottle down. He told me stories about a man who drowned off High Island. Decades ago, some fisherman who never came home. People said he'd had a wife named Mary who died not long after, heartbroken. Folks had been seeing him for years, soaked and desperate, flagging cars down on SH 87 in the dead of night. Always around the same time, it's always begging the same thing: deliver a message to a woman who's been gone a long, long time. I don't take that road anymore at night. But sometimes, when the tide is high and the air is thick with salt, I think about his eyes staring into my back seat, and I wonder what he saw back there. I wonder what he thought was following me home. It was late September of 2019 when I drove westbound on I-20. Just past Sweetwater, Texas. I remember the date because it was the weekend after my niece's birthday, and I had promised my sister I'd swing by Abilene for a quick visit before heading back to Midland. The sky that Saturday was the kind of flat, pale blue you only get after weeks of dry weather. It was hot even in the late afternoon, the air rolling through the cracked window of my Ford smelling faintly of asphalt, dust, and mesquite. The interstate was quiet for a Saturday. Trucks thundered by in spurts, but there were long stretches where it felt like I was the only one on the road. The low sun burned orange in the rearview mirror, and I kept the radio low, just enough to cut through the hum of the tires. I passed a couple of memorial crosses stuck in the dirt shoulder, those homemade roadside tributes with plastic flowers and faded photos. They've always unsettled me, especially when you're alone on the highway and you wonder if the driver who died there once felt the same breeze you're feeling. Around 6:15 p.m., I saw a small white cross on the right side of the road near mile marker 147. Nothing unusual, just another Texas roadside memorial. The flowers tied to it were wilted, the ribbon bleached pink by the sun. I didn't think much of it until maybe 10 minutes later when I glanced up and saw the exact same cross again. Same faded flowers, same sun-bleached ribbon fluttering in. The wind? I actually slowed down, confused, and double-checked the green mile marker. 147. That didn't make sense. I hadn't exited, hadn't turned around. I'd been driving straight west, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. For a second, I convinced myself maybe I had misread the sign the first time. Texas highways are long and monotonous, mile after mile of repeating scrubland. Maybe I'd mistaken one cross for another. But about 15 minutes later, there it was again. The same cross. The same mile marker. 147. I pulled off onto the shoulder, my hazard lights clicking. I sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, sweat trickling down my neck despite the AC blasting. I grabbed my phone and opened maps. It showed me where I was west of Sweetwater, just like I thought. The blue dot hovered stubbornly near mile 147, no matter how far I'd driven. The strangest part was my odometer. I had been driving almost 40 minutes since leaving Abilene, but the trip meter showed only 7 miles gained. I told myself I was tired. I'd worked a long week, and maybe I'd zoned out. I pressed the gas again, determined to ignore it. The road stretched ahead, and I tried to focus on the mundane road signs, the distant silhouette of oil pumps, the endless fences. Then, just as the twilight started to bleed purple across the sky, headlights bloomed in my rearview mirror. A black sedan, maybe an old Crown Vic, riding close behind me. At first, I was relieved. Another driver meant I wasn't losing my mind out there. But as I watched the reflection of the headlights, my stomach turned cold. The car was too close, drafting me. Yet, when I tapped my brakes lightly to signal it to back off, it didn't react. I sped up. It sped up. I slowed. It slowed. No matter what I did, it stayed just out of detail. Its headlights flooding my cab, but never quite letting me make out the driver. I decided to pull off at the next exit. Except the next exit never came. The road just kept pulling me past the same scrubland, the same fences, the same memorial cross glinting in the fading light. And then something broke in me when I realized what I was seeing in the side mirror. Behind the black sedan, maybe 100 yards back, was another car. My car, same dented fender. Same sticker and the rear glass. Same me at the wheel, eyes wide, staring at myself. I don't know how long I drove like that, caught in that loop. The cross, the mile marker, the sedan tailing me, the impossible reflection of myself trailing behind. My GPS froze, the dot spinning in place. The radio cut to static, and underneath the hiss, I swore I heard a woman's voice whispering, too faint to catch the words. At some point, I realized the sun hadn't set any further. It just hung there, orange and low, never slipping past the horizon when it finally broke, when I blinked and suddenly found myself at mile marker 152. The black sedan gone, the sun properly dipped below the horizon, nearly wept. My phone buzzed with missed calls from my sister, wondering why I'd been offline for almost 3 hours when, by my watch, only 45 minutes had passed. I didn't tell her. I just mumbled something about bad service. I've driven that stretch of I-20 twice since then. Both times, I refused to look at the mile markers, keeping my eyes locked straight ahead, knuckles white on the wheel. But sometimes, at night, I wake with the image of that memorial cross in my head. And when I check the window, I swear I catch the faint glint of headlights waiting just beyond the tree line. I don't know if anyone else has experienced mile marker 147, westbound out of Sweetwater, but if you ever find yourself out there alone, the sun low in the sky, the asphalt humming under your tires, do not let yourself look in the rearview mirror too long. Because you might see more than the road behind you. You might see yourself still driving, still trapped, still trying to get past the cross that won't let you go. It was March 26, 2022, the kind of spring day where Texas highways feel endless under a pale sky, the shoulders of I-35 painted with wildflowers. I had been driving north for hours, just past midnight, the air conditioning humming in rhythm. With the worn tires of my 10-year-old Camry, I was headed to Dallas for a Monday work meeting, the kind of trip I normally would have flown for. But flights were booked tight that weekend. By the time I hit exit 632, just outside of Waco, my eyes had grown heavy, and the thought of another hour behind the wheel made my stomach sink. That was when I saw it. The Blue Bonnet Motel. The sign rose just beyond the off-ramp, a neon flower, glowing faint blue against the night. The words clean, friendly, vacancies blinked beneath it. The parking lot was half full, the warm light spilling from the office windows, giving it an oddly welcoming feel. I pulled off without hesitation, thinking I'd stumbled on one of those little gems of roadside America. The kind of place that still washed their sheets with bleach and left Bibles in the drawers. The clerk was a woman in her 60s, air teased, high in silver under the fluorescent lights. Her NAMA tag read Marlene. She smiled too wide as I walked in, like she had been waiting for me specifically. "Long night?" she asked, her voice sweet but oddly flat. "Yeah," I said. "Just need a room for the night." She nodded, sliding a paper guest book toward me instead of a computer screen. The pages were yellowed, entries written in shaky penmanship. I thought it was some kind of quirky throwback. 35 even, she said. Cash only. That was the first thing that should have made me turn around, but I was too tired to argue. I pulled 2 20s from my wallet. She handed me a brass key attached to a long plastic fob with the number 6 written in faded marker. "Breakfast at 6, she said. "Don't miss it." Her smile never faltered. The room itself looked fine at first glance. Dated, sure, but clean. The bedspread was patterned with little blue flowers. The carpet smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the air conditioning rattled in the window. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the mattress. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the highway just beyond the lot. Sleep came fast. I woke sometime later to scratching. Not loud, subtle, like a branch against glass. My first thought was the wind, but when I sat up, I realized the curtains were drawn tight and the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was at the door. A faint dragging, like fingertips running slow across the wood. I held my breath, waiting. The noise stopped after a few seconds. When I finally worked up the courage to peek through the peephole, no one was there. The lot outside was dimly lit, empty, except for the handful of cars I'd seen earlier. I told myself it was just my imagination, exhaustion turning shadows into threats. I climbed back into bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I drifted close, some small sound jolted me awake: the creak of floorboards, the faint rattle of a doorknob down the hall, muffled voices that seemed to stop when I strained to listen. At some point, I must have dozed. When I opened my eyes again, it was dawn. Thin light pushed through the curtains. My mouth was dry, my back sore. But what startled me most was the bed beneath me. It wasn't a bed. I was lying on a wooden pallet, no mattress, no blanket, nothing but bare slats, pressing into my skin. My bag was gone. My shoes were gone. The room wasn't a room anymore, just for cracked walls, dust caked in the corners, a ceiling stained with water rings. The air smelled of mildew and dirt. I stumbled to my feet, panic rising in my throat. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and beyond it was no motel hallway. It's just an empty lot. I staggered outside into the morning haze. The neon sign was gone. So was the office, the glowing windows, the clerk with her silver hair. The lot stretched barren in every direction, weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. Rusted rebar jutted from the ground where foundations had crumbled long ago. But I wasn't alone. A handful of people stood scattered across the lot, dazed, barefoot. Their clothes rumpled like they'd just rolled from bed. Some stared at the sky, others at the dirt. A woman in a business suit hugged herself tightly, whispering something over and over. I grabbed the nearest man, a trucker, judging by his torn jacket. His eyes were glassy, his face pale. What the hell happened? Where's the motel? He just shook his head. Don't ask, he muttered. Don't talk about it. Just leave. And that's what we did. One by one, people shuffled toward the road, sticking out their thumbs or disappearing into the trees. I found my way back to the highway, barefoot, stomach churning, and flagged. Down a passing car. The driver didn't ask questions when I told him I'd been robbed and needed help. I filed a police report in Waco. They drove me back out to exit 632. The officer's face was blank as he pulled off the ramp. There's nothing here, he said flatly. Hasn't been for years. And he was right. The lot was empty, cracked asphalt stretching out beneath the morning sun. No sign of the Bluebonnet Motel. No sign it had ever been there at all. When I tried to press the officer to explain what I'd seen, he cut me off. Don't dwell on it, he said. Some places along this highway, you just don't stop. Not at night. Not ever. He didn't say another word the whole ride back. It's been over a year since then, and I still dream about that night. In my sleep, I hear Marlene's voice, cheerful and flat, telling me not to miss breakfast. I wake with a taste of mildew in my mouth. The press of wood slats against my back, and every spring, when the bluebonnets bloom along I-35, I check the exits. Exit 632 is always empty, until it isn't. I was driving south on US 77 late one evening in early October, just a few miles past Kingsville. It was around 11:30 p.m., warm but with that sticky Gulf breeze that carried the faint smell of salt and diesel from the highway. I had been on the road all day, heading toward Brownsville for work, and my eyes were getting heavy. I remember seeing the green reflective sign for Rest Area 13, its white letters glowing under my headlights, and thinking I could use a bathroom break and a few minutes to stretch. The lot was mostly empty, just one semi parked toward the back, and a pickup idling with no lights on. The fluorescent lamps above the sidewalk buzzed faintly, their glow weak and uneven, leaving parts of the rest area swallowed in shadow. The bathroom building was the usual squat beige brick structure with heavy metal doors. The air inside smelled strongly of cleaning chemicals, layered over with mildew and something faintly metallic like rust or blood. I washed my hands, trying not to think too hard about it, when I noticed a 3-ring binder sitting on the counter near the paper towel dispenser. It was thick, the kind you'd use for tax records, with a torn plastic cover and a black spine. Written across the front, in black marker, in handwriting that looked rushed, were the words, "Accident Reports." At first I figured it was some maintenance log left by the highway department. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't official at all. Inside were page after page of lined notebook paper, each sheet filled with handwriting. No forms, no typed print, just someone's handwritten accounts. Each entry began with a date, then a time, a highway location, and a description of an accident. Some were short, maybe a single car rear-ending another. Others were detailed, describing pileups, overturned trailers, fire. At first glance, it just seemed like someone keeping records of local crashes, maybe a trucker with morbid interests. But then I looked closer. The dates weren't all in the past. Many were for the next day, or even weeks into the future. I felt my stomach tighten as I flipped to one page marked for the following Saturday. It described in detail a red Ford Explorer colliding with a deer on US 77 southbound. The driver losing control, spinning out, and being hit broadside by a semi. The handwriting included exact times 2:14 a.m. and even a license plate number. I remember standing there, the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead, my hands damp from the sink, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of sick joke. But the level of detail, the license plates, the mile markers, the descriptions of injuries, it didn't read like a prank. It read like police reports, only none of it had happened. Yet, a voice startled me. The door creaked open and an older man stepped inside. He wore a faded trucker's cap and had a tired, weathered face. He looked at me, then at the binder in my hands. For a moment, his expression tightened, like he recognized it, but he said nothing. Just walked to the urinal. I felt suddenly self-conscious, like I wasn't supposed to be looking at it. I closed the binder and set it back on the counter. But as I walked out, I swear I felt his eyes on my back longer than necessary. Back in my car, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just some crazy person's hobby. Made up stories scribbled down to creep people out. But as I drove, the images stuck in my head, the pages of handwriting, the license plates, the blood described in neat, deliberate detail. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the semi's headlights behind me, glowing faintly in the distance, and for a moment I felt a cold shiver, like I was part of one of those reports. I didn't sleep much when I got to my motel in Harlingen. Curiosity gnawed at me. The next morning, I searched online for recent crashes on US 77, and my blood ran cold when I saw two local news articles. The first described an accident from 2 days earlier, exactly as one of the binder's pages had detailed a silver Honda Civic overturned near mile marker 634. 2 passengers injured. The wording was eerily similar. The second was from just the previous night, about 20 minutes after I had left rest area 13. A single vehicle accident, a pickup truck that rolled after swerving to avoid a coyote. The time, location even. The color of the truck matched what I had read on one of the later pages. I didn't go back to the rest area on my return trip. I didn't want to. But ever since then, I've been plagued with the memory of that binder, of the pages I barely tell thee. Skimmed. Sometimes I think about the entry with the red Explorer and the deer, the one marked for the following Saturday. I can't stop wondering if it actually happened. And if it did, does that mean every page in that binder will come true? One by one, like a script no one can change. I try not to drive a 77 at night anymore. When I have no choice, I avoid rest area 13 completely, even if I'm desperate to stop. But the worst part is that sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I get this gnawing urge to go back and open that binder again, to see if my name or my license plate is written on one of those pages I didn't read. And I can't shake the feeling that someday, no matter how much I try to avoid it, I'll end up there again, walking into that dimly lit bathroom, with the sound of buzzing fluorescent lights flipping to a page that's already written about me. It was late October when I drove that stretch of Ranch Road 337 near Leakey, Texas. The air had cooled down after a long, punishing summer, and the first hints of autumn sat on the hills like a faded watercolor brown mesquite, brittle cedar, and live oaks holding on stubbornly to their green. I had left San Antonio earlier that evening to visit a cousin in Camp Wood, figuring the drive through the hill country would be more peaceful than taking the main highways. The sun was already gone by the time I turned west off Highway 83, and the sky had that in-between shade of indigo and charcoal where you can't quite tell where the horizon ends. Ranch Road 337 is one of those routes people call scenic, but the word takes on a different meaning at night. The road curves endlessly through canyons and rises without warning into high ridges where, for a brief second, you feel like you're driving into the stars themselves. My high beams stretched ahead, carving tunnels of light through the cedar breaks. But everything beyond was swallowed by blackness. There were no streetlights, no other cars, just me and the occasional lowing of cattle somewhere out in the dark. That's when I began to notice the white crosses. The first one was small, tucked off to the side of a sharp bend, just where the gravel shoulder crumbled down into a ditch. I only caught it in my peripheral vision, a pale slash against the weeds, but as the headlights swept over it, I saw a name written across the horizontal board in black paint. I didn't slow down, but I remember thinking about the person who must have died there. Out in the hill country, people leave these roadside memorials all the time. A bouquet of plastic flowers wired to a fence, a wooden cross hammered into the ground, sometimes even a whole shrine with candles. A mile later, I saw another one. This one was bigger, freshly painted, and leaned against a rocky outcrop at the apex of another curve. The name on it was different, but the cross looked brand new, like someone had planted it only days ago. At first, I didn't think much of it. That road is treacherous, especially at night. People speed through those blind turns, and one mistake can send you into a canyon wall or over a guardrail. But as the miles wore on, I realized the crosses weren't occasional, they were constant. Every few hundred yards, another one appeared. Some small, some large, some decorated with ribbons that fluttered faintly in the night wind. Each one bore a name I didn't recognize, but every cross looked clean, freshly painted, untouched by sun or rain. It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. I started counting them to keep my mind busy, but lost track somewhere after 20. The repetition gnawed at me. I hadn't seen a single car, hadn't passed a house, yet every curve and dip of that road was marked with death. Around 10 miles past Leakey, I slowed at a particularly sharp curve where the headlights caught something unusual. The cross there wasn't plain wood. It had flowers at its base, fresh marigolds that hadn't wilted. I swear I smelled their earthy sweetness as I rolled past with the window cracked. I drove on, but the thought nagged me. Who had left them, and when? Another few miles, another cross, and then another. But this time, something about them had changed. I glanced at the next one and felt a prickle run up my spine. The name painted their first name. Last name looked eerily familiar. It was my last name. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was just a coincidence. My family name isn't that uncommon. But when I slowed at the next curve, my stomach flipped. This one didn't just carry my surname. It had my full name. I pulled over without meaning to. Gravel crunching under the tires, headlights glaring. Across the brush, the cross stood upright, stark white with bold black letters painted neatly across the bar. My name, my first and last. No middle initial, no mistake. For a long moment, I sat frozen in the car, engine idling, my pulse hammered. In my throat, and the silence outside seemed impossibly deep, like the world had gone on pause. The cross didn't look weathered. It didn't look like a memorial to some long-gone stranger who happened to share my name. It looked new. Wet paint glistened faintly under my headlights. I told myself I was imagining things, that fatigue and the winding road were playing tricks on me. I rolled the window up, shifted into drive, and pushed the gas harder than I should have. The curves blurred past, one after another, the white crosses flicking by in my headlights like strobe flashes. But the names kept repeating. Not always mine, not every single one, but scattered among them. Sometimes a cousin's name, sometimes a friend's. Once my mother's. Each one crisp, fresh, impossible. The last one I saw before I reached camp. Wood was angled differently from the others, facing the road almost deliberately, as though someone had planted it just for me to see. It carried only one word, painted in hurried strokes across the board. Tonight, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove straight to my cousin's house, parked in his driveway, and sat there for 20 minutes before I could even knock on the door. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I couldn't. Even now, I can't explain it. But here's the thing. I have to drive back tomorrow. And I know those crosses will be waiting. It was late September of last year, the 28th to be exact. I only remember because I'd just come back from visiting my sister in San Antonio and had the long drive home circled in my head like a chore. I live out in Alpine, Texas, and if you know that stretch of land, you know that once you get west of Del Rio, the road feels endless dusty scrub, flat horizons, and the occasional gas station with more broken pumps than working ones. That night, the temperature had dropped fast after the sun went down. The desert air does that, like the land itself, exhales all the heat it had hoarded during the day. It was clear, too, the kind of sky where the stars look closer than the black. I hit Del Rio around 11:30 p.m. and stopped for gas. The clerk at the Stripe station looked half asleep. And when I asked about the road toward Alpine, he shook his head a little. "You crossing the Pecos tonight?" he asked. I nodded. "You might not wanna. River's full." I didn't think much of it. Maybe he meant flooding, but the weather had been bone dry for weeks. I laughed it off, told him I'd be careful, and went back to the car. By midnight, I reached the bridge. The Pecos River Bridge on US 90 is long, about a quarter mile, and it sits high above the canyon where the river snakes through. At night, it looks like a strip of steel and concrete hung in the dark. The drop beneath invisible but heavy in your stomach. A state trooper's cruiser was parked near the entrance, lights spinning lazily. I slowed as he flagged me down. "Evening, sir," he said, leaning down to my window. He looked tired but sharp, like someone who'd been out there too long. "I'd hold off crossing if I were you." I frowned. "Road closed?" "Not exactly," he said. He squinted at me as if weighing something. "River's high tonight. Higher than you'd expect." I craned my neck, but all I could see was blackness beyond the guardrail. "Is it flooded?" His jaw tightened. "Let's just say it's not how it should be. If you do cross, keep your eyes on the road. Don't look too long at the water. You understand?" I thought he was messing with me, or maybe trying to spook a late-night traveler into turning around. "I'll be careful," I said, and he stepped back. Watching as I rolled forward onto the bridge, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it became. My tires hummed against the concrete, but beyond that, there was no sound, not even wind. Normally, you'd hear the water down there echoing up through the canyon, but the air was still, heavy in a way that made my skin prickle. Then, halfway across, I saw it. The river wasn't below me. It was beside me, level with the bridge, floating like a wall of black glass suspended in the air. It rippled faintly, as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. I could see reflections in its stars, my headlights, even my own car, as though another road ran parallel through liquid night. My hands locked tighter on the wheel. I tried not to look, like the trooper had warned, but it was impossible not to. The sight pulled at me, a wrongness so complete it felt magnetic. I caught movement shapes shifting under the surface, slow and deliberate, like figures walking. The water bulged once, pressed outward, then sank back flat, leaving rings that spread across the vertical surface. My pulse hammered. I told myself it was exhaustion, that I was seeing mirages. But then something stepped through. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, the outline vaguely human but distorted, shoulders too broad, arms too long. Water streamed off it but vanished before it touched the pavement, as if it dried in the air instantly. Its face, if it had one, was a blur, darker than the rest, impossible to focus on. It didn't lunge or chase. It simply walked, keeping pace with my car, each stride soundless. I pressed the accelerator harder, tires buzzing louder. My eyes darted back to the road, but I could still sense it there, moving beside me. The bridge felt endless, every yard stretching twice as long. I forced myself not to look again, but In the corner of my vision, I saw the thing tilt its head as if studying me. When I finally hit the end of the bridge, it was like snapping a thread. The sound of crickets returned. The desert air rushed in, and the river was once again below, invisible in the canyon where it belonged. I glanced to the side, nothing. The space was empty. I pulled over just past the guardrail and sat there, shaking, headlights cutting a cone into the brush. My breathing was shallow, every nerve buzzing. I thought about going back, about telling the trooper what I'd seen. But when I checked my mirrors, his cruiser was gone. Just empty road stretching back across the bridge. I drove the rest of the way to Alpine with the radio low, too wired to trust silence. The whole time I kept glancing at the passenger seat, certain I'd see wet footprints seeping into the fabric. I haven't crossed that bridge at night since. When I have to go east, I plan my trips so I hit it in daylight. Even then, I swear the river looks higher than it should, as though it remembers. And sometimes, when the sun hits the water, just right, I think I see something standing beneath the surface, head tilted up, waiting. That trooper knew he wasn't warning me about flooding. He was warning me about them. And if you ever drive us to 90 at Del Rio, someone tells you not to cross after dark sun, because whatever comes out of that river doesn't stop at the water's edge. It was August 11th, 2021, a Wednesday. I remember that because I'd been driving from Marfa toward Presidio, cutting across that stretch of desert highway where the Rio Grande snakes quietly beside the road, and Mexico sits just across the water. It was 4:17 in the afternoon when I noticed my gas tank dipping dangerously low. My truck had been giving me trouble for weeks, sputtering when the fuel got close to empty. And I didn't want to risk stalling in the middle of nowhere with the sun hammering down. FM 170 is a lonely stretch. If you've ever driven it, you know how the desert presses in on both sides brown. Dry hills rolling like waves, mesquite and cactus breaking up the sand, and nothing resembling civilization. For miles. The air smelled faintly metallic, like hot stone baking under the sun, and the heat shimmer made it look like the road itself was swaying. That's when I saw the gas station. It sat back off the highway about 50 yards, a squat, single-story building with a faded Texaco sign hanging crooked on a pole out front. The windows were tinted too dark for me to see inside, and the paint, once white, maybe was blistered and peeling, exposing concrete beneath. The lot was cracked, weeds pushing through, but I spotted 2 old pumps that looked functional enough. Relieved, I pulled in. My tires crunched gravel, scattering a few lizards sunning themselves near the edge. There was no one else around, no other cars or trucks, just silence and the low whine of cicadas. I parked near the first pump and got out. The pump itself was an old analog type with the spinning numbers instead of digital readouts. I picked up the nozzle, half expecting nothing to happen, but when I flipped the lever, the pump kicked too. Life with a low hum. Gasoline flowed, the smell sharp in the dry air. That's when I noticed the convenience store door was propped open with a cinder block. The interior was dark, shadowy, but cool air drifted out. It felt strange, like walking into a place that shouldn't be there, but I figured I'd grab a soda for the road. Inside, it was dim and smelled faintly of mildew and something sweeter, almost like syrup gone bad. The shelves were lined with dust-covered snacks bags of chips with logos I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Candy bars and wrappers that looked retro. At first, I thought it was some kind of gimmick, a tourist trap, keeping vintage stock. But when I picked up a can of Dr. Pepper, I noticed the date stamped on the bottom, August 14th, 1991. I laughed nervously. That can't be right. I grabbed another Coke, still in the old Rednan white can design. July 1991. I pulled a bottle of Gatorade from the cooler, its plastic brittle in my hand. June 1991. Every single drink, Every snack carried expiration dates from 30 years ago. "Everything all right, sir?" The voice made me jump. Behind the counter stood a man I hadn't noticed when I walked in. He must have been sitting very still because he seemed to rise out of the shadows. He wore a grease-stained button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and his skin was leathery, tanned too long in the desert. His eyes were pale gray, almost cloudy, and he had a smile that didn't quite touch them. "Yeah," I muttered, setting the Gatorade back. These are old. Really old." He chuckled, a dry sound, still cold though. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on my arms rise. I paid for a bottle of water, though even that had an ancient date on the cap. The man didn't move much, just rang it up. On an old mechanical register, the kind with big metal keys that clacked loud in the silence. As he handed me the change quarters dark with tarnish, he said, "Drive safe out there. Lot of strange things on these roads." Back in my truck, I shoved the bottle into the cup holder but didn't open it. My stomach turned at the thought of drinking 30-year-old water, even if it looked clear. I pulled back onto FM 1070, glancing once in the rearview mirror. The man was still at the doorway, watching me, his figure dark against the dim interior. A week later, I drove the same route again. This time, I slowed as I approached the spot. The station should have been there, tucked back off the road. Instead, there was nothing but a concrete slab, cracked and sun-bleached. No pumps, no sign, no building. Just bare foundation, as if the structure had been bulldozed years ago. I parked on the shoulder, got out, and walked into the lot. The slab radiated heat, the kind that makes your boots stick slightly when you lift your foot. A few snakes were stretched out lazily on the warm concrete, rattlers and garters tangled together, their scales shimmering in the sun. The air smelled different, they're musty, like damp earth, even though the ground was bone dry. I crouched, running my hand along the concrete, half expecting to feel something carved into it. Nothing, just smooth, weathered stone. When I stood, I realized the desert around me had gone silent. No cicadas, no birds, no wind. Just me and the snakes, their heads all turned subtly in my direction, tongues flicking in unison. My chest tightened, and I backed away slowly until I reached the truck. I didn't take my eyes off that slab until the station was well out of sight in the mirror. I've driven that road 3 more times since. There's never been a gas station. There again. Locals, I asked, in Presidio looked at me blankly, swore no such station existed between Lajitas and town. One old guy at a diner shook his head and said, "You must have pulled off in the wrong place. Ain't been anything out there for decades. But I know what I saw. I know I paid that man with coins, so old they're sitting in my desk drawer. Right now, tarnished and heavy. I've thought about throwing them out, but something keeps me from doing it. Sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I swear I hear that dry chuckle. The register keys clacking, faint and far away. And once just one sigh woke to find the unopened bottle of water from that day sitting on my nightstand. I'd left it locked in the glove box of my truck months earlier. I didn't drink it. I never will. But I can't help thinking about the man's parting words every time I get behind the wheel. Lot of strange things on these roads. He was right. And I'm starting to wonder if the next time I drive FM 2170, that slab won't even be there anymore. Only the snakes. Always the snakes. It was Friday, October 14th, 2022, around 9:30 p.m. when I took FM 51 North out of Granbury. The evening was cool, just dipping into the mid-60s with that faint autumn sharpness in the air. I remember because I cracked my driver's side window halfway down to breathe it in. The sky was cloudless, the kind of dark blue that looks almost black once you leave the spill of city lights. I was heading to Weatherford after a late dinner with a friend in town. Normally, I'd take US 377, but there had been a wreck earlier, and traffic alerts warned of a slowdown. FM 51 seemed the cleaner route, quiet, straight, and rarely traveled this late at night. The first thing I noticed was the orange glow. A line of hazard barrels and reflective cones appeared ahead, forcing me out of the main lane. The blinking arrows and temporary detour signs looked official enough, so I followed them without thinking. They led me rightward into a wide subdivision. Entrance I didn't recognize. The sign at the corner was bent at an angle, almost unreadable. My GPS didn't even flinch, just kept telling me to continue ahead, as if nothing had changed. The houses were modest brick builds, most with sink garages and squat porches. All the lawns were manicured to that same trim height, the kind of look you see in HOA-regulated neighborhoods. It struck me as odd how uniform it was, almost sterile. Every porch had the same bulb casting the same faint cone of yellow. Every driveway sat empty. No kids' bikes, no cars, no Halloween decorations, despite the month. Just silence and light. I slowed down when I saw the man. He was standing in a front window, directly facing the street. Not doing anything, just standing behind the glass, lit faintly by the porch bulb outside. He didn't move when I passed, didn't lift a hand, didn't even tilt his head. I only caught him because my eyes naturally wandered as I turned the corner, and for a split second our gazes seemed to lock. I pressed the gas a little harder and focused forward. The loop brought me back to the same stretch within a couple of minutes. Same bend, same porch light, same man behind the window. My first thought was that I'd circled around too quickly. Maybe the detour wrapped in a short loop to spit cars back onto FM 51 further up. I checked the GPS again, still telling me to continue straight. But the voice directions sounded different, almost delayed, like they were playing from underwater. The second loop was when unease set in. I passed the same house, the same light, and the same man in the same window. He hadn't shifted an inch. His arms hung slack by his sides, shoulders sloped forward. No curtain, no blinds, just him framed. They're like a display. The porch light buzzed faintly, but no insects hovered around it. The silence pressing in through my open window was absolute. I pulled my phone up, trying to check maps, but the screen froze. A pixelated smear where the road should have been. Then the voice, flat and mechanical, told me, "Continue straight. Continue straight. Continue straight." It repeated until I shoved the phone face down on the passenger seat. By the fourth time, I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Each loop took me maybe 3 minutes, and each ended at the same house. There weren't other cars, no signs of road crews, not even the sound of crickets. The subdivision was a hollow shell, repeating itself like a track stuck on loop. The only variation I noticed was with the man in the window. On the fourth pass, his head tilted slightly, not much, just a few degrees, like he was trying to see me clearer. My stomach dropped into ice. I sped up, pushing through the curve harder than I should have. When I came back again, the tilt was gone, but his hand was pressed to the glass now. Flat, fingers spread. The porch light above him flickered, just once, like it was straining. I yelled out loud, "What the hell is this?" Like saying it might shatter whatever was happening. But my voice felt swallowed, muffled by the night. I tried everything: U-turns, cutting across yards, even reversing the way I came. Each time, the roads bent me back to the same place. Tire tracks I'd carved in a patch of lawn were gone the next loop. Grass restored. It was as if the neighborhood was erasing my attempts. The seventh loop broke me. As I came around, the man wasn't in the window. Relief hit me first, sharp and sudden. But then I saw the porch light had gone out. The window was nothing but black glass reflecting my headlights. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might tear free. I pressed the accelerator down until the engine whined, praying the loop would break. When I looked again, he was closer. Not in the window on the porch itself, standing in the pool of headlights. His face was wrong, blurred somehow, like I couldn't focus on it no matter how I strained. His hand lifted slowly, palm forward, as though signaling me to stop. I swerved around him, nearly clipping the curb. When I glanced in the rear view, the porch was empty again. I don't know how long I drove like that. Time lost its shape. Could have been 20 minutes, could have been 2 hours. Each lap made me more frantic. My gas gauge sank lower, the needle trembling near a quarter tank. I tried shutting my eyes tight, counting to 10 and reopening them, hoping it would reset, but when I did, the car was already angling back toward that same damned bend. Then something shifted. On what I think was the 10th loop, I caught sight of a break in the line of houses. A narrow street cutting left, darker than the rest. It hadn't been there before. My hands turned the wheel before I even thought. The car surged onto the road, tires bumping over uneven pavement. I didn't dare slow down. It felt endless. That street with no lights, no houses, just trees pressing in on either side. Then suddenly, I was jolted out onto FM 51 again, just north of where I'd entered. The barrels and cones were gone. The GPS map unfroze, redrawing my position. The normal voice calmly told me to continue toward Weatherford. I pulled over, shaking. So badly, I had to sit with the hazards on for nearly 10 minutes before I could breathe normally. When I looked back in the mirror, the subdivision entrance was there, but it looked different. The sign was cracked, weeds overgrown, no cones or barrels to guide anyone in. The road sloped into shadow, silent and empty. It looked abandoned, like it hadn't seen traffic in years. I've asked around since then, casually, trying not to sound unhinged. No one seems to know about a detour on FM 51 that night. Some folks mention an unfinished development near that stretch, houses built and left half occupied when funding dried up. Others swear the area was cleared years ago, never finished, no one ever moved in. Yet, I know what I saw. The perfect lawns, the porch lights, and the man in the window. I haven't driven FM 51 after dark since when I park in my own driveway late at night. I catch myself glancing at my living room window before I go inside, just to make sure no one is standing there, waiting. It was late August of last year, around the 26th, if I remember right. Just outside of Pecos, Texas, I was hauling equipment for a contractor that serviced rigs scattered along US 285. A stretch of highway oil field workers called Death Highway because of how many wrecks happen out there. That morning, the sky was the color of dust, the kind of pale tan haze that hangs low when the heat hasn't fully broken yet. It was about 7:15 a.m., already pushing 90 degrees. The air sticky with that faint smell of crude that rides the wind. Out here, I'd been sent to deliver replacement valves to a rig site tucked off one of the Kalish roads, branching west of 285. The directions were basic. Turn off at mile marker 46. Follow the dirt road 5 miles until I hit a chain-link gate with a small guard shack. I'd been to plenty of those, and they all looked the same sun-bleached trailers. A chain gate, maybe a pickup parked half in the shade. Nothing unusual about it. When I pulled up, there was a man standing by the gate, waving drivers in. He wore a standard FRC shirt, hard hat, and safety vest. From a distance, he looked like every other oil field hand. Sweat-darkened collar, steel toes caked with white dust. He lifted his hand to stop me, then waved me forward, the way gate guards do when they're letting trucks through. He didn't look at me directly, just this stiff, mechanical wave, and then a quick turn of the head toward the shack like he was checking me off. I rolled down the window as I stopped, ready to give my delivery order. He leaned down, and I got a good look at him. Middle-aged, sun-baked skin, crow's feet at the eyes. He looked tired but solid, the kind of man you expect to see out here. He asked for my bill of lading in a voice that sounded flat, like he was reading it off a script. I handed it over. He nodded, said, "You're clear," and opened the gate. I didn't think much of it until later that night. The unloading went fine, though the rig hands on site were a little jumpy. They worked fast, didn't talk much, and no one wanted to linger by the trailers. I chalked it up to the heat. Still, one of them, a younger guy with a patchy beard, asked me, "Who let you in?" I told him the gate guard, described the man I'd seen. The kid went pale and shook his head. "Ain't nobody out there this week. We're short-staffed." I laughed it off at first, figured maybe someone was covering shifts, but the way he said it made me uneasy. When I left, the gate was open. The shack was empty. That night, I grabbed dinner in Pecos at a Whataburger. Sitting 2 booths down was an older driller I knew by sight, Joe Morales. I told him about the delivery, mentioned the man at the gate. Joe set his burger down, stared at me like I'd just said something insane, then asked me to describe the man again. I did. He leaned back, crossed himself, and muttered, "You just saw Hank." The name didn't mean anything to me then. Joe explained Hank Rivers had been a gateman at that same site until February. He'd been caught under a runaway pipe during a night shift, crushed instantly. Joe swore up and down that Hank's funeral had been in Odessa months back. But drivers still say they see him, Joe told me, voice low, standing at the gate, waving him through. Like he don't know he's gone. I didn't believe him, couldn't. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The man had taken my paperwork, held it in his hand. I'd watched him open the gate with the chain clanking against the post. He was solid, real, sweating in the morning heat. I even noticed the patch sewn on his vest, sewn Field Energy, stitched in faded red. The next day, I checked my cab for the bill of lading copy, the one he should have signed. His name was scrawled on the signature line, Hank Rivers. I didn't sleep that night. I drove back by the site at sunrise, telling myself I'd see the guard again and prove it was just some mix-up, but the shack was empty, padlock hanging loose. I asked around, and the company confirmed they hadn't posted anyone there since May. Every so often, when I haul down 285, I think about pulling off at that mile marker again. I never do. There are still times when I'm driving before dawn, and I see a figure by the roadside in my headlights, wearing a hard hat, hand raised in a slow wave. I blink, and the shoulder's empty. The strangest part, the paperwork with his name on it vanished from my glove box 2 weeks later. I never found it. I don't tell this story to scare anyone. I just want to warn drivers. If you're headed down 285 near Pecos and a man waves you through a gate, check his eyes before you stop. If they look tired but empty, like he's working a shift that never ended, just keep driving. Because I don't think Hank knows he's dead, and I don't think he wants you to leave once you're inside. It was late October 2015, a Thursday night. Cool and dry in El Paso. I remember because the desert wind had that crisp edge to it. The kind that stings the inside of your nose and carries sand grains that scratch against your teeth when you talk. I had just wrapped up a late shift at Fort Bliss, driving my old silver Tacoma across Loop 375, better known as Trans Mountain. It's a road that slices through the Franklin Mountains, a long, dark ribbon of highway with nothing but the looming rock faces and the occasional headlights of truckers grinding their way through. It was about 11:45 p.m. The dash clock glowed. green in the cab. My radio had been cutting in and out all night, static bleeding between country stations, so I'd left it off. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the pavement. I'd driven that stretch 100 times before, but that night felt different. It wasn't just the cold, or the fact that the sky was moonless and cloud-thick. There was a pressure in the air, a kind of expectant stillness that made me grip the wheel tighter than I needed to. About 2 miles past the scenic overlook turnout, I saw him, a figure on the shoulder, standing perfectly still. Thumb out. It was unusual, but not impossible. Soldiers without cars sometimes hitch a ride between base and the west side, and I figured maybe one had gotten stuck out late. He wore fatigues. At least that's what it looked like in my headlights, a camo jacket, close-cropped hair, pale face. The desert air must have been cold for him to be out there with no pack, no visible gear. I slowed down, more out of instinct than reason. Something in me whispered not to stop, but training and habit pushed back. You don't leave a fellow out there. It's not in the middle of the night. I pulled onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching under the tires. He opened the passenger door without a word and slid in. I caught his face in the dome light for half a second, sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes that didn't meet mine. He looked young, early 20s at most. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He didn't answer. He just sat there, hands folded neatly in his lap, staring straight ahead. I figured maybe he was tired or shy. "Are you from Bliss?" I asked. Nothing, not even a blink. The silence stretched, filling the cab heavier than it should have. I noticed then that his seatbelt was fastened. I hadn't seen him reach for it, hadn't heard the click. It was just there, snug across his chest, like it had always been buckled. That's when my skin started crawling. I kept driving, telling myself I was overthinking it. People freeze up. Some don't like talking to strangers. Maybe he was one of those. I adjusted my rearview mirror out of habit, and my stomach dropped. The seatbelt lay flat across an empty seat. I blinked, leaned forward, heart thudding in my throat. I glanced back at him. He was still there, still staring forward. But in the mirror, there was nothing. Just my empty passenger seat with a belt stretched tight, buckled into nothing. Cold washed over me, prickling the back of my neck. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I didn't dare say anything. I didn't dare move. I just kept my eyes on the black highway unraveling ahead. The air in the cab grew colder, sharp enough that I could see my breath fogging faintly in front of me. The smell of dust and engine oil was replaced with something metallic, coppery, like old blood left to dry on steel. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to pull over, to scream, to jump out and leave the truck behind, but my body wouldn't obey. I kept driving, locked in place. The soldier, whatever he was, still sitting stiff beside me. A few miles later, near the western exit that slopes toward Canutillo, I risked one more glance in the mirror. The seatbelt hung loose, unbuckled now, swaying gently as if something unseen had just let it go, and the passenger seat was empty. I whipped my head to the side. Nothing. Just my jacket crumpled against the door. The temperature in the cab returned to normal, my breath no longer visible, but my hands were slick on the steering wheel. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, every shadow on the roadside making my chest seize. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my apartment with the lights on, listening for footsteps that never came. Over the years, I've heard stories from other soldiers, other drivers, about the pale hitchhiker on Trans Mountain. Some say he's a ghost of a private who died in a wreck during a training run. Some say he's older than the base itself, a desert spirit that takes the shape of whoever you'll feel guilty enough to stop for. All I know is what I saw, or what I didn't see. A seatbelt stretched across nothing, buckled tight, holding a weight that shouldn't have been there. and the memory that 4 miles across the dark mountains, I wasn't alone. It was a Thursday night, March 14th of last year, a little after 10 in the evening. I remember the time because I had just gotten off a late shift at the warehouse outside Lockhart. My usual route home to Austin takes me along Highway 183, but that night I decided to cut across State Highway 130 near Mustang Ridge. It's the kind of stretch people either love or hate, mostly empty. Long blacktop lanes stretching out into the night, with the occasional 18-wheeler roaring past, like a ghost made of diesel and chrome. The air was cool, the kind of spring night in Texas where the humidity hasn't yet gotten unbearable. I rolled the windows halfway down, let the night air mix with the smell of worn leather inside my old Chevy, and turned the radio low enough that it blended into the background hum of tires on pavement. The sky was clear, no moon, just endless stars. I always liked driving that road at night. It has this strange silence to it, like the world itself is holding its breath. But somewhere between the Mustang Ridge exit and the long straightaway that dips past Onion Creek, I started to notice a sound. At first, I thought it was just a siren way off in the distance, faint, like a police cruiser miles behind me. It rose and fell in that familiar pitch. I instinctively checked my rearview mirror, expecting to see flashing red and blue lights. Nothing, just empty blacktop stretching behind me. I pressed a little on the gas, maybe nudging from 65 to 70. Strangely, the sound faded. Not completely, but it dropped into the background, swallowed by the rumble of the road. I relaxed a little, chalking it up to echoes, or maybe even the whine of my own engine playing tricks on my ears. But a few miles later, at a stop sign where SH2 130 intersects with a farm road, I slowed almost to a crawl. That was when the siren surged back, loud enough that it made my pulse skip. It wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It wasn't directional at all, it was just there, pressing in on the cabin of my truck. I muttered to myself, "What the hell?" and actually killed the radio to make sure. The sound didn't stop. It wasn't exactly a siren the longer I listened. It was too human. It rose and fell in the same rhythm, but there was something wet and close to it, like breath drawn through a throat that didn't want to breathe anymore. The strange part, and I swear to this day this is true, the slower I drove, the louder it got. When I eased my foot off the gas, letting the truck idle at maybe 55, the sound swelled until it seemed like it was right there in the cab with me. By the time I hit 20, it was deafening. I could hear every drag of air, every guttural exhale, and it synced perfectly with my own breathing. I tested, it took a sharp inhale. Sure enough, the sound mirrored me, like some unseen mouth was pulling in the same air at the same time. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles were white. I whispered, almost to prove I wasn't losing it, "This isn't real." And the echo came back, not words, not a voice, but a long, trembling exhale that matched mine exactly. I panicked then, slammed my foot on the gas, and the sound dropped instantly, fading until it was barely there, no louder than wind slipping. Through a cracked window, my heart was hammering, and I forced myself to stare straight ahead. The black road stretched out, broken by white lane markers, and the highway seemed endless. I didn't dare look in the rear view anymore. I drove like that for miles, hands shaking, the speedometer climbing just to keep the noise at bay. I only let myself slow once I saw the glow of Austin's outer lights bleeding into the horizon. By then, the sound was gone, like it had never been there at all. The next morning, tried to laugh it off, telling myself maybe it was tinnitus, or a highway resonance, or just plain exhaustion from working late. But the thought that stuck with me, the part I can't shake even now, is what would have happened if I'd let myself come to a complete stop out there. If the sound had grown louder than my own heartbeat, louder than the engine, louder than everything sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night. I swear I can still hear it faintly, the rise and fall of breath that isn't mine, waiting for me to slow down again. And I don't drive SH-130 anymore. Not at night. Not past Mustang Ridge. Because I know that siren wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. It was in late February, just after midnight, when I stopped at the giant travel center in New Braunfels, Texas. If you've ever driven I-35 between Austin and San Antonio, you know the one. It's impossible to miss, lit up like a small city. With 100 gas pumps, rows of neon signs, and that towering mascot smiling down at you like it's watching your every move. Truckers, families, drunk college kids, and road-weary travelers all end up there eventually. It's a kind of liminal place, existing halfway between the highway and nowhere. I had been driving since 9 that night, heading back from visiting a friend in San Marcos, and I was worn thin. My plan was simple: grab some coffee, stretch my legs, and keep moving. The air outside was cool, 52 degrees according to my dash, and the parking lot glowed with the hum of white floodlights. The smell of diesel hung faintly, even though the wind carried it off quickly. It was normal, familiar, even comforting. At first, inside, the place was buzzing but not crowded. Bright fluorescent lights reflected off shiny tile floors. The walls were lined with racks of snacks, t-shirts, and knick-knack sketchy Texas souvenirs, stuffed armadillos, and barbecue sauce bottles shaped like boots. The smell of brisket from the deli counter lingered over everything, mingling with burnt coffee. I remember glancing at my phone. 12:07 a.m., that was when I noticed them for the first time. A family of 4. A tall man in a worn ball cap, his wife in a denim jacket, a teenage girl, maybe 15 or 16, with straight dark hair, and a younger boy clutching a toy car in his hand. They weren't remarkable in any way, but something about them held my eye. They were moving together, close, but not speaking. The dad grabbed a soda. The mom looked at chips. The boy trailed his toy along the freezer door, making a soft, rattling sound. The girl just walked, eyes down, shoulders hunched. I figured they were traveling late, same as me. Nothing unusual. Nah. I paid for my coffee, lingered a bit, and got back on the road. By 2 in the morning, the highway had grown emptier. I drove another stretch, fighting fatigue, and finally convinced myself to pull back into the same travel center. I hadn't meant to stop there again, but the exits blur together at night, and habit pulls you back to familiar spots. When I walked in, I froze. The same family was there, moving through the aisles in the exact same sequence. The father at the soda machine, the mother comparing chips, the boy dragging his toy car along the glass door, the girl with her head down. Same clothes, same movements. I told myself it had to be coincidence. Maybe they lived nearby and stopped there often, or maybe I'd misremembered. Still, the way their motions lined up with what I had already seen gnawed at me. I left quicker that time. I didn't even refill my cup. Back in my car, I sat for a few minutes in the dark lot, watching travelers go in and out under the glow of the fluorescent sign. My hands shook slightly from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I told myself I was tired, imagining patterns where none existed. I pushed on, determined to get closer to San Antonio before dawn. I rolled the windows down to keep myself awake, letting the cold night air slap against my face. The road was empty, except for the occasional 18-wheeler roaring past, headlights washing over me and disappearing into the black. The hum of tires on pavement felt hypnotic, like a lullaby meant to lure me into drifting. By 4 a.m., my resolve gave out. My eyelids burned, my head nodded forward at stoplights, and I knew I couldn't risk it anymore. Against all logic, I took the same exit back to the giant travel center. The parking lot seemed thinner now, emptier, though a handful of trucks idled along the back row. The air felt colder, though my dash still said 50 degrees. The lights above the pumps buzzed faintly, some flickering, casting strange shadows. That shifted when I moved my head. Inside, the store was quieter than before. The hum of the refrigeration units was louder, without as many voices to drown it out. The smell of brisket was gone, replaced by something faintly metallic, like wet coins or blood. I stepped inside and felt the hairs rise on my arms. The family was there again, same man, same woman, same girl, same boy. And they were doing it again, the same sequence. The soda machine, the chips, the boy's toy scraping the glass, the girl's head lowered. Only this time, the boy looked up as I passed him. His face was pale, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, like he was about to say something. Then he dragged his toy again, same as before, as if nothing had happened. I stopped, staring, waiting for someone else in the store to react. Nobody did. The cashier leaned on the counter, scrolling on his phone. Uninterested, I grabbed another coffee just to give myself a reason to be there. My hands were trembling so much, I spilled some into the holder. When I turned toward the register, the family was already moving past me, toward the restrooms in the back. Their sequence was broken, and for some reason, that terrified me more than anything else. It meant they weren't just echoes, not some weird déjà vu I was caught in. They had noticed me. I paid and left fast, not even looking behind me, until I hit the parking lot, and when I did, I swear I saw the boy standing just inside the glass doors. Toy car in hand, staring out at me. I got in my car and drove. I don't even remember pulling back onto the highway. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly I thought I might snap it in half. The world outside felt wrong, like the air itself was thicker, heavier, resisting me. I kept glancing in my rear view, half expecting to see headlights following too closely, or worse, that family sitting in the back seat. Silent. I made it home just after sunrise, eyes raw, nerves shot. For the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about them, the way they moved, the way the boy's eyes had locked on mine, the way nobody else in the store seemed to care. I told myself I'd never stop there again, no matter what. I even avoided that stretch of highway. But last night, driving home late from San Antonio, I passed the exit, and in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw them, standing under the floodlights by the pumps. The father in his cap, the mother in her denim jacket, the boy with his toy, and the girl with her head down, not moving, just waiting. I don't think they're trapped in the store anymore. I think they noticed me noticing them, and now they're waiting for the right time to follow. And if you ever find yourself at the giant travel center in New Braunfels in the middle of the night, watch the aisles carefully. You see them moving through one by one in the same sequence. Don't linger. Don't stop a second time, because once they notice you, I don't think you can shake them. Not ever. It was late October last year, on one of those nights when West Texas feels like it's swallowing you whole. I was driving eastbound on US 84 just past Sweetwater, heading back toward Abilene after finishing up a job. It was about 9:15 p.m. I remember because I checked the clock on my dash before pulling out of the truck stop. The weather was bone dry, as always, but there was a wind whipping across the plains that rattled the cab and carried that faint burnt smell you only get out there, like scorched earth mixed with dust. The sky was clear, stars scattered, sharp and bright. But the land below was nothing but open darkness except for the line of white turbines that stretched across the horizon. If you've ever been down that stretch, you know what I mean, those towering wind turbines that rise out of the fields, blinking red in sync, like 1,000 slow heartbeats keeping rhythm in the night. They're eerie in daylight, but at night, when the blades stop, They looked like broken sentinels frozen mid-motion. That night, they weren't turning. Not even a groan of movement, just still silhouettes against the sky. I noticed them immediately. Because usually there's at least a few spinning, but the whole row stood dead still, like soldiers at attention. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe they'd cut power. Maybe the wind wasn't right. But then I noticed something stranger there. Shadows. See, the moon was hanging half full behind me, high enough to throw long, thin shadows across the highway from the turbines. But as I drove, I started realizing the shadows didn't line up. They weren't fixed like you'd expect. They seemed to shift across the asphalt, sliding like hands reaching for me, sweeping with a rhythm as if the blades were still turning even though they weren't. At first I thought it was my headlights playing tricks, or the reflection of another vehicle. But I was alone on the road. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was nothing. Just my pickups, beams cutting the empty blacktop. The feeling built slowly, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been working all day, and long drives in the dark can make your mind wander. But the shadows didn't stop. They slid over the pavement, thick and black, pacing my truck as though something enormous and unseen was still in motion above. I rolled the window down, trying to snap myself out of it, and the cold air poured in, carrying the faint hum of the turbines, only they were still. Stone silent, no creak of steel or whine of blades. But I swear on my life, I heard that low, rhythmic thrum, the kind that rolls in your gut when the blades spin in unison. I could feel it more than hear it. About 10 miles past Sweetwater, near the Nolan County line, the highway dips into a darker stretch where there aren't any towns or exit signs for miles. That's when it got worse. The shadows lengthened, crossing the road in wide arcs that stretched from one end of the horizon to the other, sweeping over my windshield like giant pendulums. They weren't random either. They moved in sync, like they were keeping pace with my speed. I eased off the gas, watching the speedometer drop from 70 down to 60, then 55. The shadows slowed too, like they were tied to me. My hands went slick on the steering wheel. I wanted to pull over, but every instinct screamed not. To stop, I tried turning up the radio, just static. No stations coming through. My phone had no bars. The cab felt too small, like the air was heavy, pressing in on me. At one point, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the field figures, maybe standing between the turbines. Not people exactly. They looked stretched, elongated, like the shadows themselves had pulled free and were standing upright. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look too long, but the shapes lingered, sliding along with me, keeping to the edge of the road. When I finally reached Roscoe, the town lights broke the spell. The turbines thinned out, and the shadows disappeared as suddenly as they'd come. My radio crackled back to life. My phone lit up with signal. The world felt normal again, like I'd driven out of a nightmare. I pulled into a gas station, stepped out, and just stood there, shaking, staring back west toward the darkness I'd left behind. The turbines were still visible on the horizon, still standing dead and silent. No shadows this time, just red lights blinking in their slow, steady rhythm. I told a buddy about it a few days later, and he just shrugged, said the planes can play tricks on you. But here's the part that unsettled me most. Last week, driving home from Lubbock, I came down the same stretch of US 84, and the turbines were spinning again. Normal. But as I passed, I caught sight of something that made my stomach turn. At the base of one of the towers, etched into the dirt like something heavy had dragged across it, was a dark, circular groove. A perfect ring, wide and deep, as though the shadow of a blade had carved itself into the earth. I haven't taken that route at night again, and I don't think I ever will. Would you like me to expand this story further to hit exactly your requested length of 10,000 characters? Right now, it's a bit shorter, and I can stretch the build-up, add more dialogue, and draw out the paranoia to make it heavier and closer to a true Ripshy-style slow burn. It was March 18th, 2022. A Friday morning, just after the spring break storms had passed through South Texas. I remember it because the rain had stopped in the night. And by dawn, the air outside San Patricio smelled sharp with wet earth and mesquite. I was driving west along FM 666 locals, call it the Devil's Highway. Though officially, it's just Farm to Market Road 666 headed toward Mathis to pick up supplies for my uncle's ranch. The sun was barely up, burning a pale orange. Haze through low clouds, and the asphalt still glistened from the night's rain. Traffic was light, just a handful of trucks and oilfield service vans scattered along the two-lane stretch. The fields on either side looked soaked and gray, and mist clung low above the furrows. I had the window cracked and could smell cow manure mixed with damp wildflowers. That's when I noticed the bus. It was parked a little crooked on the shoulder near a stand of Hiseki trees. Maybe a mile past an old roadside chapel that's been closed for years. At first, I thought it was one of those old activity buses some ranches use for labor crews. It was white, long, with peeling paint and faded lettering across the side. The words weren't readable at first, just faint shadows of where paint used to be. The bus's hazard lights weren't on, but the driver's door was open, and the front end was angled just enough into the ditch that it seemed abandoned. I slowed instinctively because out here when you see a stranded vehicle, you check if someone needs help. As I got closer, I could read the lettering more clearly. It said New Mount Olive Church in big block letters. The problem was, that church burned down back in the 90s. I remember because my parents used to talk about it whenever we drove past the ruins on Highway 77. The congregation scattered after the fire. The town paper even ran a story about how they never rebuilt. But here was this white church bus sitting quietly off FM 666 like it had just rolled out yesterday. I pulled to the opposite shoulder and stopped. The engine idled under me, a low vibrating hum. My first thought was maybe someone had bought the old bus at auction, repainted it, and was using it. But the thing looked too fresh in one way and too decayed in another. The tires were caked in mud, but not flat. The glass was clean, no cracks, though the paint was chalky and flaking. The strangest part was the windows. Every single one was tinted almost black, but behind that tint, I swear I saw shapes. Not clear. Faces or anything, just faint outlines, like people sitting still. I told myself I was being paranoid. I put the truck in park, stepped out, and the smell hit me. Not gasoline, not rot, but something dry and chalky, like old hymn books mixed with mildew. The air was dead quiet. No cicadas, no bird calls, even though the sun was fully up. I crossed the road slowly, gravel crunching under my boots. The open driver's door swayed gently in the morning breeze. I cupped my hands to the tinted glass and tried to look in. Nothing but black reflection, just my own face staring back at me. That's when I heard it. A faint rustle from inside, like people shifting in their seats. Then a cough dry, shallow, like an old man clearing his throat. I stepped back immediately. My heart was hammering. I thought maybe there was a homeless group camped inside, or maybe a stranded family. I called out, "Y'all need help? You okay in there?" No answer, just silence. I tried again, louder this time. "I can call a tow if you're stuck." Still nothing. Then I heard something, a soft, drawn-out hum. It was faint at first, but it rose in volume, like voices joining together. It took me a few seconds to recognize it. It was a hymn. Not one I could name, but the kind of slow, mournful harmony you'd hear at a rural Baptist church. The sound wasn't coming through the door. It was resonating, like it filled the entire bus, yet the glass and steel walls muffled it so deep it made the hair on my arms lift. I don't scare easily, but something about that sound made my gut twist. It wasn't joyful, not comforting. It was flat, heavy, and endless. I backed away, climbed into my truck, and shut the door hard. I sat there with my engine running, watching that crooked white bus in my rearview mirror. The hymn stopped as soon as my door closed. Just cut off mid-note. I should have driven away right then. But I grabbed my phone instead and opened the camera. I zoomed in, tried to take a picture. The screen showed the bus, but the windows reflected light like mirrors, nothing inside visible. I snapped the photo anyway. Later, when I looked at it, the bus wasn't even in the frame, just an empty shoulder of road. I finally pressed the gas and pulled away, faster than I should have on that wet pavement. My hands were shaking on the wheel. A few miles down the road, near the county line, I passed an older man on a tractor. I slowed and flagged him. I asked if he knew anything about a church bus sitting up the road. His face went still. He shook his head slowly and said, "You don't stop for that. You just keep on." When I pressed, he told me a story. Over the years, people had reported seeing that same bus parked along FM 606. Always at dawn, always near San Patricio. Sometimes near the chapel ruins, sometimes farther west. Folks who stopped and climbed aboard were never seen again. Just gone. Deputies searched, but the bus was never there when they followed up. He said the rumor was the bus belonged to New Mount Olive's last congregation, the ones who died in that fire in '97. Some swore they were still trying to make it to their Sunday service. I wanted to dismiss it as just rural superstition. But 2 weeks later, I heard about a local man someone I vaguely knew through my uncle who went missing on that same stretch. His truck was found idling on the shoulder, door open, hazards on. No sign of him. Deputies said the ground was too wet to track footprints. His family swore he was the type to stop and help strangers. I drive FM 666 less these days, and when I do, I make sure it's after sunrise. I don't take pictures anymore. And if I see that bus again, I won't slow down. Because the last thing I remember, just before I pulled away that morning, was a face pressed to the glass of the back window, pale, expressionless, staring right at me. And I know I shouldn't admit this, but sometimes when I wake up before dawn, I swear I hear that low, mournful hymn drifting through my bedroom walls, like the sound has been following me ever since. It was the evening of March 9th, 2022. I only remember the exact date because I had driven down to Bandera that afternoon to help my uncle haul some tools back from his shop. The sky had been clear when I left his place, the kind of cool late winter Texas dusk that makes the air smell faintly of cedar and mesquite smoke. By the time I hit State Highway 16 heading south, the temperature had dropped noticeably, and a thin gray mist was pooling in the valleys. It wasn't unusual. That stretch of road has low dips where fog settles, especially when warm Gulf air pushes inland. But this wasn't the usual fog. I rolled down my window to get a better sense of it, instead of the damp, earthy smell you'd expect in the hill country. The fog carried a faint tang, sharp and salty, like brine. It hit the back of my throat in a way that reminded me of standing too close to the surf on Padre Island. I remember thinking it was strange because Bandera is a good 3.5 hours from the coast. I even said out loud, "That's not right," just to hear my own voice against the quiet hum of the truck. At first, it was almost beautiful. The fog glowed lavender in the headlights, not just gray or white, but tinted like the sky right before sundown. It rolled low across the road, not high enough to obscure the treetops. but thick enough to blur the center lines into a smeared streak of yellow. I slowed to about 45, even though the limit is 65, because something about it felt wrong. The silence of that highway pressed in. I hadn't seen another set of headlights in at least 20 minutes. Then I noticed the deer. The first one stood off to the right shoulder, half in the fog, its outline stark in my high beams. I braced myself instinctively, ready in case it bolted into the road. But it didn't move. Its head was up, ears alert, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the light like mirrors. About 100 yards further, there was another deer on the left side. Then another after that. Each stood facing the road at nearly identical angles, like they had been arranged there. I slowed even more, scanning ahead. As the fog deepened, more shapes emerged. They weren't scattered as deer usually are, darting or grazing at odd distances. These were lined up, evenly spaced, each animal perfectly still, standing just beyond the white lines as though waiting. My hands were tight on the wheel, my pulse quickening. I tried to laugh it off, muttering, "Damn, it's like a roadside parade." But the sound of my voice only made the silence heavier. I passed maybe a dozen of them before something felt distinctly off. It took me a moment to realize what it was. They weren't breathing. At least I couldn't see the rise and fall of their chests. Not even the fog of breath in the cold air. Every deer I passed seemed carved from something solid, their glassy eyes locked forward. I told myself it was the fog playing tricks on my vision, but my knuckles were bone white against the steering wheel. Then I saw the last one. It stood taller than the rest. A massive buck with antlers that stretched wide, branching like crooked fingers. I slowed almost to a crawl as I approached. Unlike the others, it wasn't facing the road, it was turned directly toward me. The headlights hit its face, and I swear to God, its head kept turning farther and farther as I rolled past, following me. The angle was wrong. It went beyond what a deer's neck should allow, swiveling smoothly until it was nearly backward, eyes still locked on me through the window. I slammed the gas and didn't look again. My chest was pounding so hard it hurt, and I felt the wheel shake under my hands as the truck roared up to 65. The lavender fog whipped past in thick sheets, blurring everything outside into a smear of purple-gray. I just kept my eyes on the faint yellow lines, praying not to drift off the road. When I finally burst out of it, the air cleared all at once, like crossing through a curtain. The briny tang was gone, replaced by the dry cedar scent of hill country. Night? My hands were shaking so badly, I had to pull over at the first gas station I found. I sat there in the lot, engine running, trying to calm myself down. A guy walking out of the store noticed me and asked if I was okay. I almost told him everything, but the words stuck in my throat. What was I supposed to say? That a deer twisted its head like an owl and watched me drive away. I've taken that road a dozen times since then, in daylight and at night, and I've never seen the lavender fog again. But every time I pass that stretch south of Bandera, I roll the windows up tight and keep my eyes straight ahead. Because I know what I saw that night, and I know that if I had slowed down any more, if I had let myself look too long, maybe I wouldn't have made it through. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I still catch that faint, salty smell in the air, miles from the ocean. It was the second week of October last year when I drove out to Ward Garner State Park, south of Leakey, Texas. I remember the date clearly because it was a Friday night, October 13th, and I'd left San Antonio after work around 8 p.m. The temperature was dropping into the high 60s. The air crisp in that early autumn way that makes you roll down the window just enough to breathe it in. The sky was moonless, the stars sharp against a black canvas, and the two-lane highway leading west felt emptier than usual. I had my old Honda Odyssey packed with a cooler, a sleeping bag, a weekend's worth of camping gear. I wasn't in a rush. My plan was simple: pull into the park, find my reserved spot, crack a beer, and let the hill country quiet work its way into me. But I never made it to the campsite. The first strange thing happened on FM 1050. The Farm to Market Road that curves down into the park from Uvalde. If you've ever driven it, you know it's a narrow strip of asphalt pressed between hills, with barbed wire fencing and dark trees crowding in. That night, around 10:15, I saw hazard lights blinking up ahead. A van was pulled off on the shoulder, both sliding doors wide open. It caught my eye for one reason: it was the same make and model as mine. A maroon Odyssey, the older body style with a missing hubcap on the rear left wheel. The exact same missing hubcap as mine. I slowed as I passed, craning my neck to see if someone needed help, but no one was there. Just the van, hazard lights, pulsing doors yawning open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. I muttered out loud, "That's weird," and drove on. I figured maybe the owner had gone to relieve themselves in the brush, though I didn't see a flashlight beam or hear movement. 5 minutes later, the road bent downhill and straightened. That's when I saw another set of hazard lights. Same place on the shoulder, same van, same missing hubcap. This time, I pulled over. I left my engine running and stepped out, the cool air brushing against my arms. The hazard lights blinked in a rhythm that seemed to slow, like the battery was dying. I peeked inside, empty. No keys in the ignition. No bags or papers, no smell of fuel, or even the faint lived-in odor a van usually has. It was sterile. I got back in my van and sat there for a minute, trying to reason it out. Maybe a trick of déjà vu, maybe a coincidence. But as I drove another mile and saw a third identical van, my stomach dropped. Same hazards, same doors, same missing hubcap. This time, I didn't stop. I pressed the gas and told myself to get to the park entrance as fast as possible. But the road stretched on, and every mile or so, I passed the same scene again. A copy of my van, sitting dead on the roadside, hazard lights beating like a slow heartbeat. At one point, I rolled down the window to listen. I thought maybe I'd hear crickets, the distant rush of the Frio River, or a coyote howl. Instead, there was silence. An oppressive kind of silence that pressed against my eardrums. Even my own van seemed quieter, like the tires weren't really touching asphalt. The 7th time I passed the van, I noticed something new. The driver's door was open now, not just the sliding ones. And in the glow of my headlights, I thought I saw someone sitting behind the wheel. Pale hands on the steering. Wheel, head bowed. I gripped my own wheel tighter and said out loud, "No, nope." I floored it, but the faster I drove, the more the road folded back on itself. I kept checking my odometer, and it was like I wasn't covering any distance. My GPS on the dash froze. It said I was still 3 miles from the park entrance, but the mileage never ticked down. Then, as I passed yet another version of my van, I caught a glimpse inside. And this time, it wasn't empty. There was a cooler in the back. Cooler? Same blue igloo, same dented lid. A rolled sleeping bag on the seat. My sleeping bag. I slammed the brakes so hard, I nearly fishtailed. I pulled onto the shoulder, breathing. Hard sweat suddenly beating on my neck despite the cool night. I walked to the back and opened my own hatch. The cooler was there, the sleeping bag too. Still in place, I shut it quickly and stared down the road, heart pounding in my ears. When I finally forced myself to keep driving, I passed one more copy. Only this time, the hazard lights weren't blinking. The van sat dark and dead, and the doors were all closed. In the glow of my headlights, I saw a figure standing in front of it. It was me, not a mirror reflection. Not a look-alike. Me? Same jacket, same jeans, Same cheap ball cap I always wore when I drove long trips. He stood in the middle of the lane, watching as I barreled closer. I swerved to avoid him, nearly clipping the barbed wire fence. And when I glanced back in the mirror, he was gone. I don't remember how long I drove after that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But eventually, without ever passing a park entrance, the road widened and spat me back out onto Highway 83. I was 20 miles north of where I should have been. I didn't try for the park again. I turned east and drove straight home, arriving around 3 a.m., too shaken to sleep. The next morning, I went out to check the van in daylight. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The hazard lights switch. The one on the dashboard that you press to turn them on was sticking slightly out, like someone had pressed it, then let it go. It was August 12th, 2021, just after 8 in the evening when I pulled into the Aransas Pass Stripes gas station off Highway 35. The sky still had some light left in it, a pale orange fading behind the flat stretch of marshland. But the air was heavy and damp in that coastal way that makes you feel like you're breathing through wet cloth. I'd been driving from Corpus back toward Rockport, my old Chevy pickup rattling worse than usual, and I only stopped because I figured the radiator could use a break. I remember thinking how empty the station looked. There were no cars at the pumps, no one coming in or out. Just the humming of the lights over the lot and the thick, sticky air. I went inside, grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of sunflower seeds, and when I came back out, the first thing I noticed was the payphone by the side of the building. It was one of those old, sun-bleached metal booths with a scratched plexiglass cover, the kind you hardly ever see anymore. What caught me was that the receiver was swinging gently, like someone had just let it go. I stopped and stared at it because the phone was ringing. Not once, not twice. It kept going in that shrill, metallic tone, echoing louder in the quiet lot than it should have. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe because it was so out of place. Maybe because my granddad used to tell me about the hurricane that nearly leveled this part of Texas back in 1970, and I thought of him right then. The phone was cool and sticky against my ear. And before I could say a word, a voice started speaking. "Hello, Daniel," the man said. My name. He said it calmly, like he'd been waiting for me. His accent was flat. Maybe Texan, maybe not. "You're heading north. I want you to listen carefully. There's another storm coming." Froze. I hadn't told anyone I was driving. Tonight, I hadn't used my name in the store. And the man's words didn't sound like a warning for a storm in the forecast. He said it like he was telling me a story, low and deliberate. In 1970, when Celia hit, the water came for the houses before the wind did. It lifted boats into yards, pulled cattle down Highway 35. People thought they were safe, but they weren't. "Do you remember that, Daniel?" I whispered into the receiver. I wasn't born then. My throat was dry. The line hissed, and for a second I thought the call had dropped, but then he chuckled. A low, knowing sound. "You weren't," he agreed, "but you will be." Tried to speak again, to ask who he was, but my voice cracked into nothing. I could hear something faint under his words, like rushing water or static that had weight to it. The sound made my stomach turn. Then he said, "Don't take the causeway. The water remembers." That was when I hung up. My hand was shaking, but I shoved the receiver back and half stumbled to my truck. I started the engine, but I just sat there for a minute with the AC blowing hot because it hadn't kicked in yet. I couldn't make sense of what I'd heard. My name, the storm, the causeway. It felt like I'd just been told something meant for someone else, except he'd known who I was. And he'd sounded so certain. I told myself it was a prank. Someone nearby with a scanner, maybe, or some drunk sitting in a trailer park calling random numbers until someone answered. That made sense until I pulled out of the lot and glanced. In the mirror, the payphone receiver was swinging again, though I hadn't seen anyone touch it after me. Swinging hard, like someone was on the other end, yanking it. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight home, ignoring the causeway like he'd said, even though it was the fastest route. I told myself it was just nerves. But when I got in, I left the TV on to drown out the silence. Around 2 a.m., the news broke in with an update about a tropical depression forming in the Gulf. They were already speculating it could strengthen by the weekend. I turned the TV off and sat there in the dark, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. The next morning, I drove back to that gas station. Broad daylight, clear skies, nothing strange about it at all. I walked around to where the payphone had been, only there wasn't one. Just a rusted-out post with some broken bolts where something had been mounted years ago. I asked the cashier about it. She looked at me like I was messing with her. "That phone's been gone 10 years, she said. "I haven't driven through. Orances pass at night since then. And I don't answer ringing phones if I don't know where they are. But sometimes when the weather radio kicks on with a hurricane warning, I swear I can hear that same hiss under the broadcast, like water, pressing against glass. K, and I keep waiting for the voice to say my name again." It was the night of June 12, 2022, a Sunday. I remember it clearly because I had just wrapped up a weekend visiting a friend in Houston and was heading back north toward Dallas. I was about 2 hours into the drive when the gas light came on. It was humid, the kind of sticky Texas summer night where the air feels heavy and smells faintly of asphalt and pine. The clock on the dash read 11:42 p.m. The road was nearly empty. Just a few semis far ahead. Their taillights read pinpricks in the dark stretch of I-45. That was when I saw the green reflective sign. Exit 277B, gas, food, lodging. I hadn't seen another station in miles, and with my fuel gauge inching toward empty, I pulled off. The exit curved into a narrow, cracked service road lined with tall grass on both sides. The headlights cut through a swarm of moths, and then, out of the darkness, a flickering fluorescent canopy appeared. There was only one pump. The place looked like it had been forgotten decades ago. Faded Pepsi machine by the door. Hand-painted sign that just read, "GAS, open." Though the open part was barely lit, the station itself sat slouched back from the pump, its windows dark. No cars in the lot, no sign of life, but the pump screen glowed faint green, waiting. I rolled to a stop and got out. The air smelled strange, not of gasoline or hot pavement, but of freshly cut grass. The nearest field was at least half a mile back, and at that hour, no one should have been mowing. The smell was sharp, almost metallic. I swiped my card and the pump clicked on. The numbers ticked upward like normal until it hit 2.77 gallons. Then the pump slammed to a stop, hard enough that I thought maybe I'd broken something. I tried squeezing the handle, again nothing. I reset it, swiped the card again, started the flow, and it worked fine, until it hit 2.77 gallons again. Stop, annoyed. I hung the nozzle up, pulled it back down, and tried a third time. This time, when the counter reached 2.77, it didn't stop. It started counting backward. At first, I thought it was some glitch. But as it ticked back down, I realized something else. The smell of cut grass grew stronger, thick enough to make my throat tighten. I pulled the nozzle out of my tank, and instead of spraying gas, a thin mist of something greenish drifted out. It smelled sweet, cloying, and wrong. I dropped it fast, and it clattered against the concrete. That's when I noticed the sound soft, rhythmic, like someone's shoes brushing against grass. Only there was no grass, just cracked pavement and weeds. I turned, and about 30 yards away, at the edge of the canopy light, stood a man. Or at least, he looked like a man. He was tall, too thin, wearing overalls that might have once been denim, but were dark and damp at the knees. His arms hung slack at his sides, and his head tilted, watching me. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the outline of his mouth open, wide, too wide. "Station's closed," he said, but his voice didn't carry right. It was like he'd spoken inside my head, too close, even though he hadn't moved. I fumbled with the nozzle, shoved it back into the pump cradle, and slid into my car. The pump screen glitched, flashing random numbers. Then froze again at 2.77. I cranked the ignition, and the engine roared to life. My headlights caught the man for just a moment as I swung the wheel to pull out. And that's when I saw it, his jaw unhinged and stretched further, the skin pulling taut until it looked like his mouth split clear to his collarbone. I don't remember the exact drive back to the interstate. I just remember flooring it, the smell of cut grass filling the car so strong it made my eyes water, and the feeling that something ran parallel to me in the dark, just out of sight. When I finally merged back onto I-45, I glanced in the mirror. The service road behind me was empty. The gas light was still on, but when I checked the gauge again, hadn't moved, was frozen at 2.77 gallons. I made it to the next busy exit by sheer luck. Coasting on fumes, pulling into a well-lit chevron with a line of cars at the pump. As soon as I got out, the smell was gone. Just regular gasoline, heat, and tar. But when I opened the tank cap, I swear I heard it, the sound of grass being cut, faint but steady, as if it were coming from inside the tank. I sold that car a month later. The buyer asked me about the odometer because the numbers didn't line up right. I glanced at it and felt my stomach drop. The last 3 digits read 277. I don't take I-45 at night anymore. If I can help it, I don't stop for gas anywhere near Huntsville. And if you ever see the sign for exit 277B, don't pull off. Keep driving, even if you're running on fumes. Because whatever waits at that last pump isn't trying to fill your car. It's trying to empty something else.